Okay. Hi, and welcome to the Love Frequency. I'm your girl, Lola Lovely. And this is going to be a really rich topic. And the podcast today is about the goddess archetype. It is entitled, The Goddess Archetype, Does She Live in You? I had the wonderful process of speaking to a friend this weekend at my housewarming party, and we were talking about archetypes, and goddess archetype came up. And I want you to know that this episode is a love note to the part of you that knows you were born divine, that knows that you were born amazingly wonderful, beautiful, perfect, and complete. The goddess isn't just a mystical idea. She's an archetype that lives in the psyche and the spirit of anyone who is really willing to embody this sacred feminine energy. And this episode, we're going to explore how the goddess archetype shows up and how you can connect with that goddess archetype, and how everyone carries the energy of goddess archetype, but it's not everyone's archetype. I'm going to backtrack a little. And I want to say the archetypes that we all share, there's 4 main archetypes that we all share. We share the victim, we share the saboteur, we share the victim, the prostitute, the saboteur, and the inner child. However, all of us don't share the goddess archetype. It is not an archetype that every woman has. It is an archetype that you can embody, that you can step into, that you can make become a part of you, but it is not something that all of us have. It is not a god. Everyone does not have the goddess archetype. Now, can every woman claim goddess aspects? Can every woman claim goddess energy? Yes. It's very important to understand that this archetype, the goddess archetype, isn't something that we all will ultimately know how to utilize, know how to embrace, know how to embody, and know how to step into it. Not all of us have the goddess archetype. It is an archetype that only some of us have, just like the mystic archetype is only, some of us are mystics. Some of us are channelers or mediums. Not everybody is, just like not everybody is like, a computer nerd. Everyone cannot be a goddess. It is an archetype that you can step into, that you can embrace, that you can learn, but it's not something that, if it's not innate in you, it's not your archetype. And there's a process that you can go through to find out your main 12 archetypes. We all have 12, just like 12 zodiacs, 12 months. We all have 12. 4 we all share: prostitute, saboteur, victim, and child. We all have that. Not all of us will have this goddess. And I mean, like, for me, I feel like I have part of the goddess, but I don't feel like it's one of my main archetypes. But the goddess isn't just a mystical idea. She's an archetype that lives in the psyche and the spirit of anyone who really wants to embody this divine feminine energy. So this episode explores how the goddess archetype shows up and how to connect with that goddess archetype, and anyone who actually carries that energy, how they can connect with it. You can connect with their energy as well. So we're just going to talk about this wonderful archetype of the goddess. What is the goddess? And for everyone who doesn't know, what is the goddess archetype? The goddess archetype is the embodiment of divine feminine energy, creativity, intuition, nurturing, sensuality, power, and wisdom. She appears in countless forms, from Venus to Kali, from Oshun, who will beat you up, to Atabe. There is this limit. She is not limited to women or to spirituality. She just is sacredly embraced. She is in a sacred embraced energy. So the goddess energy is not just limited to women, because men could have the goddess archetype. So do we all have it? Unlike our 4 survival archetypes, we don't all have it. I hate to say that. You can't, I cannot help you to have an archetype you don't have. How I can actually help you to understand an archetype. I can help you to tap into an archetype. You can tap into an archetype and you can embody an archetype. But if it's not your divine archetype, it's hard to say that you will actually be able to utilize and manipulate that energy. You know, I feel like that the divine goddess energy is much more of an energy that is, I mean, do I know anyone that I think has the goddess energy? 100%. I think I know maybe one or two of my friends out of all the women that I've ever met in my 50 years of life. Maybe one, maybe two have had the true goddess energy. And I love the idea of engaging in this archetype of the divine goddess and the goddess energy. I love the idea of actually stepping into this goddess energy and embracing my divine feminine. I'm a little bit, because I'm learning to be an archetype coach. It's one of the trainings that I'm currently in. I'm a little bit put out to say that people are teaching archetype classes and saying, oh, you could have this archetype too, but you can learn of this archetype. Just like you can learn to flirt, you can learn to embody the mystical idea of the goddess, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's your archetype. So, with that being said, I'd like to just go in and dive a little bit deeper into the idea of the goddess archetype and what it looks like to me and what it looks like it showing up for others. And I believe that there's an idea that we want to have this beautiful, divine, feminine energy that seems powerful, and we can have all that if we could balance out our 4 survival archetypes. We can then move into our divine feminine because we've balanced our 4 survival archetypes. Because if your inner child is running amok in your stuff, how can you be a goddess? If you're sabotaging yourself left and right, how can you be a goddess? If you're claiming to be victimized by the world and life and everything that's happening around you, how could you be a goddess? And if you're willing to sell yourself or parts of your soul to have security, safety, or whatever, how can you be a goddess? I am extremely confused with the idea of teaching you a goddess archetype, but not teaching you the survival archetypes first. It's very interesting to me. And because the goddess archetype is not a universal archetype. You have to call that energy, or it has to be awakened in you. And I have to say that those of us who resonate with the idea of beauty, of healing, of inner power, of sensuality, of ritual, can connect to the ideal of this goddess archetype and can connect to the archetype itself, but it doesn't mean that it's in our pantheon of archetypes. Now, I just want to say this too. You can awaken archetypes in you. You can awaken this by going through transition and awakening. You can go into a huge heartbreak, and this might bring out the energy of the goddess in you, and maybe it brings out that archetype at that time in your life, and that's how it shows up, for you. Now, how does an archetype, this goddess archetype, show up daily is a very different thing. How you may feel her when you're dancing or making art or resting. You can feel her when you are setting sacred boundaries and when you're leading from the heart and holding space for others. This is when I feel the goddess archetype. Is it one of my archetypes? No. But when I'm teaching a yoga class, I feel that goddess coming out. And she also shows up in your rage and your refusal to be silent, in your softness. This is also where the divine archetype of the goddess can show up. She is in the wild. She is in your stillness. She is in your dance. So the shadow side of the goddess archetype is glamour magic, or using beauty or sensuality for manipulation. And I just touched on this in the spiritual performance podcast. So go take a look at that. It's out on Spotify. Becoming overly identified with image or perfection. This is something that I talked about, perfection over completion. I did a podcast on that. Feeling disconnected from the grounded reality, floating in the divine, but neglecting the human. This is how that embodiment can get too much and you can go over in energy. Now, how to embody the archetype of the goddess? Honor your body as sacred. Let's just honor your body as sacred. Create rituals that celebrate your cycle, your power and your intuition, your moon cycle, your feminine cycle. Those are important. Channel energy through creative movements and spiritual expression. So do some 5 rhythms, do some, ecstatic dance, do something. Study the goddess from different cultures. This is important. I love to look at the different cultures of the goddesses. Archetype is one of my favorite. Kali, because she will break down shit. Love that. And reflect on the energy and how you could utilize their teachings and their energy. Reflect on that. So, how does the goddess archetype show up for us daily and in our daily lives? I think for everyone it's going to be different, but for me, the goddess archetype shows up in my life when I am playing music, when I'm being creative, when I'm making art, when I'm resting. Sensually, the goddess archetype shows up in the fact that I want to be intimate or sexual in that time, because the goddess archetype goes hand in hand with sensuality and sexuality. It shows up during times of intimacy and sex. I think also you can feel the integration of the goddess archetype when you are creating boundaries. This is one of the things, like, you can definitely pull in the energy of goddess archetype because she's along the lines of divine feminine, except for the goddess has a little bit of more of a twist. She has a little bit more grit than the divine feminine, because divine masculine and divine feminine, they marry each other and they balance one another. But then when you have this goddess energy, there's a more grit to it. There's more of a little bit of a feistiness in the goddess energy. And I believe, for me, when I look at the divine goddess energy and the divine goddess archetype, specifically the archetype, not the energy. Let's separate this real quick. The archetype itself is a characteristic of how your soul can move. The energy of the goddess is a far different thing, because energy is cyclical and moving. We can pick up the energy of the goddess. We can pick up the energy in many ways. From the happiest creative, we could be creating something and it just puts us over the top. We can take an edible, get really zonked, and get super horny. The goddess energy shows up. That beautiful sexual Venus energy shows up, and it's like you're on a mountaintop and you want to, get it in until you can't get it in anymore. Yes, that it can show up in that way. So you can feel the goddess energy daily in life through many different ways. But the archetype itself, you have to actually integrate the archetype, and you have to actually study the archetype of the goddess and really see how that archetype moves. Have you seen goddesses and how they move? Think of some of the beautiful actors from, the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, and, the Josephine Bakers, the Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe is the goddess archetype. Josephine Baker, goddess archetype. Eartha Kitt, goddess archetype. They had the goddess energy. They had the grit, they had the softness, they had all of that goddess energy. Now, was it in their archetype list? Probably, because they exuded it. And it's something that when I say those names, you'd be like, yeah, that's a goddess. They have that goddess energy. Diana, Princess Diana, was a goddess. She made people fall in love with her. She had that Venus energy of like, hey, see me, love me, because of see me as the soft, divine feminine that I am, and love me and care for me. She created this beautiful energy of goddess. So how it shows up for us in a daily life, I'm going to look at my notes because I don't want to miss anything, is leading with an open heart and holding space for others. That's one way that the goddess archetype can show up for us. Creating sacred boundaries for ourselves and setting up sacred spaces for people. That is another way that the goddess can show up. I feel the goddess energy the most when I dance or when I'm playing music, because dancing, especially like, when you're doing any kind of spiritual dance. I created my own spiritual dance called the Love Zone Freedom Dance. And in doing that, I just love the energy of creating and welding and melding energy. And in that, I feel the goddess energy come up and movement. So in making art and movement and resting deeply and taking care of yourself, this is how you can see that beautiful energy of the divine feminine show up, aka the goddess energy, the goddess archetype show up. And guess what? The goddess archetype can also show up when you are mad as fuck and you just cannot take it anymore. That's when the goddess can really show up, because she's about to zap somebody. Oshun, Oya, goddess. Atabe, goddess. Kali, goddess. Kali ripped off men's heads. She was a divine, sexual, beautiful, wonderful, feminine, but she also was a destroyer. Kali destroyed. So there's energy in that, and there's energy in understanding that the goddess energy isn't always beautiful. There is a flip side to it, that it shows up with rage and anger. Your goddess can come in, when you are angry. And it can come, the goddess energy can show up when you have the refusal to want to be silenced any longer. And you have decided that your softness needs to be wild, and it needs to be moving, and it needs to be free. And she can also show up in stillness and in quiet. So the goddess can show up there as well. The shadow sides of the goddess, to me, are probably the goddess archetype, and we're going to say the goddess archetype and the goddess energy. The shadow side of the goddess archetype and the shadow side of the shadow of the goddess energy, is overusing our beauty and our sexuality to manipulate people. And I just did a podcast on spiritual performance, and it was really important for me to say it, and I'll say it again because this shows up again in the goddess archetype, that in the spiritual community, we have a lot of spiritual performance happening, a lot of not really fully talking about the truth of the experience. My experience for growth has been the hardest thing that I've ever gone through. And it's not always beautiful, and it's not always wonderful, and it's not always perfect. But I understand, for me, like I got lipstick on. I can't beat my full face. The house isn't clean. By no stretch of the imagination. If I was to turn the camera, I got soda cans on here and all types of stuff. So it's like overutilizing the idea of beauty and sensuality for manipulation, to manipulate you into thinking that the healing aspect is easy because I'm in my goddess archetype, and therefore the goddess is experiencing no things that are going wrong. That's bullshit, and that is the archetype is now riding in its shadow side. And then becoming overly attached to the idea of perfection, or to identify with the image of perfection. That is the goddess energy is running overtime. The goddess archetype, if you've integrated the archetype as part of your 12 archetypes, is running in a shadow side. If you have become overly identified to the image or to perfection. If you start to feel disconnected, or you are not grounded in reality, you are running in the shadow side of a goddess archetype. So I want to just say that, to close this out, the way to embody the goddess energy and to understand the goddess archetype, there's a couple things that you can do. Number one is that you can honor your body. It is a sacred space. I'm going to say it again. Honor your body. It's a sacred space. If you were to honor your body more, that means health-wise, what you eat, what you wear, what you ingest, mind, body, soul. If you were to honor this as a sacred space, how many sexual partners you have, what it is that you ingest, because it's not just food, what it is you put on your skin. I make skincare. I make plant-based skincare, and I am really starting to clean up my brand, because there's some things that really might not be great for us. As we learn, the more and more that things come out, we realize certain things are not good for us, right? So what it is that, how what it is that you put into your body, on your body, and around your body. So create a space for your body to be the sacred temple that it is. That's number one if you want to really embody the goddess archetype. Create rituals that celebrate your cycle and your power and your intuition. So rituals that follow your menstrual cycle for yourself are going to be personal, and you can call in energy, the goddess energy, during that time. And you can make sure that you are also channeling the energy, channeling the goddess energy in the time of your rituals, also channeling the goddess energy when you are creating, when you are in movement, and during your spiritual expression. Channel that goddess energy, pull in that divine feminine. And another way that you can actually integrate this is you can start to study the goddesses that inspire you, that you want to look into. I definitely have looked into Venus, because Venus is the goddess of love, And I wanted to understand, because my Venus is in Taurus at 717, and I did some research on that because my Venus is in Taurus, and I married a Taurus on 717, so it was very interesting. That's a whole other podcast. But I did some research on that. I did some research on Kali, because, man, I needed some Kali energy. I needed to be able to kick ass and take names. Where's my fire sword of fire? I need that sometimes to take care of myself, to stand up for myself. And then you can study some goddesses, and you can really start to reflect on how those goddesses, and can you see yourself in those goddesses, or can you see any part of those goddesses in you? It's the goddess archetype just seems very generalized, but when you start to pull in a goddess and say, all right, I have the goddess archetype. Well, are you like Kali? Have you cut off men's heads? Not literally or physically, but emotionally, have you cut off men's heads? Have you cut off every relationship you had at the head? Then you might have the Kali energy. You might have the Kali goddess energy and archetype. You might have that. So doing some research will help you to actually integrate and embody these goddesses. So in closing, I just want to say that this is a love note to you. And this is a love note to the parts of you that whispers, I am sacred. I am sacred. I am a goddess. I am strong. I am independent. I am soft. I am supported. This episode is a love note for the part of you that whispers, I am sacred. I want you to remember that goddess isn't something that you become. It is something that you remember inside of you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, and a radiant point of light, and I'm blessed by your presence. Welcome home, goddess. And as always, I'm your girl Lola. Stay in the love frequency. Bye.